Just going into our Facebook.
Okay, hello and welcome to everyone joining us for today's very important and timely panel with our partners from the Kyiv Independent. We are pleased to be joined today by Ukrainian Canadian Congress Chief Executive Officer Ihor Mikhailchyshin, who will offer brief remarks in a moment, and our two key speakers. Olya Rudenko is the editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Independent. She first became a journalist in 2011 with the Kyiv Post as a staff writer and became an editor in 2013 and deputy chief editor in 2017. She's written for many global publications, including USA Today and the Washington Times. And in 2021, she was a fellow at Chicago Booth School of Business. We have also with us today Ilya Ponomarenko, who is the defense and security reporter at the Kyiv Independent. He has reported about the war in eastern Ukraine since the conflict began in 2014. He covers national security issues as well as military technology, production and defense reform in Ukraine. And he has also been deployed in Palestine, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as an embedded journalist or embedded reporter with UN peacekeeping forces. He is the recipient of the Alfred Friendly Press Partners Fellowship and was selected to work as USA Today's guest reporter at the US Department of Defense. We will be discussing the view from Kyiv today on Russia's escalation of aggression against Ukraine. We look forward to an on-the-ground update and expert analysis from our two guests. For the audiences, we will be taking questions after brief presentations, and so you can type Q&As into the Q&A function on your screen, and then we will combine the questions and ask them of our two panelists after their brief remarks. So before we start with our two panelists, I'd like to ask Ihor Mikhailchyshin from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress for his brief greetings and remarks. Ihor.
Thank you, Orest, and thank you for hosting today. I do want to note that Olya Rudenko is on the line with us with audio only. So for those who are viewing the screen, you may not be able to see her, but you'll certainly hear from her throughout. So she's joined us today. Thank you very much to the Kyiv Independent for agreeing to co-host this with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Certainly, we are very pleased to be one of your patron followers, and we support independent journalism in Ukraine, and we're very pleased to see the work that you're doing, that you have been doing since November. My job today is just merely to thank everybody for coming together on this important topic. As Canadians can see, the Russian aggression against Ukraine is the #1 story in Canadian media. I've been doing nothing but media interviews, trying to explain and give context. This past weekend, we had a hashtag Stand With Ukraine call to action, where we saw Ukrainian Canadians from coast to coast, from Halifax to Vancouver Island, literally come to stand with Ukraine, along with politicians from all parties. And support for Ukraine is a nonpartisan issue here in Canada, and continues to be. And we know this because also the UCC worked with Abacus Data to put out a new poll. The information's on our website. The poll was released just recently, and it tells us that 4 out of 5 Canadians are open to or support Canada doing more to help Ukraine. And on the issue of defensive weapons, where we're really calling on the government of Canada to quickly join the list of NATO allies that are providing this kind of defensive assistance to Ukraine, we see that 3 out of 4 Canadians support or are open to providing defensive weapons assistance to Ukraine. So that's very strong support, and we believe that that cuts across all of Canada, all political parties, all generations as well. So again, thank you to everybody who supported the Stand With Ukraine call to action. There will be more to come on this kind of community activism, and we look forward to hearing the view from Kyiv today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ihor, and I will now ask Oля Rudenko, the editor of the Kyiv Independent, to speak to us for 5 minutes about the general situation and how people in Kyiv and in Ukraine are viewing and feeling about what has happened today. Oля, please.
Thank you, Oris. Thank you, Igor. Thank you for organizing it. I'm gonna try to turn on my video. Hi, everyone. There are some technical issues on my end, so I might have to go back to audio, but let's give it a go. If I would need one word to describe the feeling in Kyiv today for most of us, I think I would say it is very surreal, because the kind of tension that we have been feeling is the kind of tension in the news. It is in a very stark contrast with what we see in the streets, how normal life goes on, and how most of people, to be honest, even around us, around journalists in our sort of mini bubbles, most of people still remain. It's not what you expect them to do when you read Western news about how Ukraine is under the imminent threat of attack, and you kind of expect people to be panicking and just stocking on groceries or leaving the country. But that's not, to be honest, what we see around us today. And as I said, it is kind of unnerving when this clashes with our everyday work, with how we cover the situation, and all the news and stories that come out in dozens every day about the trying to analyze the plans of the Kremlin about Ukraine. I do want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's been sending this kind messages of support to not just to us, but to anybody they know in Kyiv and in Ukraine, because we've been getting many of them, and it really means a lot. We really appreciate our friends and acquaintances abroad, just letting us know that they're thinking of us at this time, and that we have their support. It really means a lot. I want to also take this opportunity to thank you, Oris and Igor, and everybody who's supporting the Kyiv Independent, because we had to launch our publication right almost at the same time when this military buildup started happening. And so we launched, as Ilya just mentioned earlier, in early November, and immediately the covering the threat of Russian invasion has become the top story for us. And trying to set up a full-fledged media outlet, a new publication amid this happening, it's pretty challenging, and it's a very exciting opportunity, but it's also overwhelming. So thank you to everyone on behalf of the whole team. Thank you to everyone for supporting us, and for becoming our patrons on the Patreon platform. For those of you who are not yet supporting us, if you want to do so after this webinar, you can go to our website, thekyievindependent.com, and you'll find the link there. So just to address the situation as we feel it in Kyiv today, I think there was sort of a turning point this week, certainly for me and for quite a few people in my circle, when we learned that the embassies of the United States and of the UK started moving non-essential staff and families of diplomats out of Ukraine. I think this was not, I think, but I actually know that for many people, this was the point when it all became much more real for them. And I started getting messages from my friends who are not in journalism, who just were asking me, is this real? Is this really happening? Do we need to, start packing our things and, maybe potentially leave the country now for some time? This was the morning of, I think, Monday, when we learned that overnight, I think we learned that the embassies withdrawing their stuff. And this was a very, very unnerving moment because even to me personally, it kind of was a moment when I realized that we can potentially end up in a situation of very real invasion, and we would be on our own against Russian troops. And at the same time, I want to refer everybody to a very important report that we published yesterday. It is an analytical report by a Kyiv-based think tank called Center for Defense Strategies that is led by a former defense minister of Ukraine. And this, it is a very profound analysis of the situation from the kind of military strategy point of view, not analyzing, what Putin may or may not want to do from the geopolitical point of view, but purely from the militaristic point of view. Like, does Russia have enough troops? Does it look like they're going to invade? And that report says basically that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, it is most likely that Russia will not be ready for a full-fledged invasion. And I do recommend everybody to read the report. It's we translated it for our audience yesterday. It was published in Ukrainian, and we did a very fast translation in English, and it is on top of our website if you go there. So yes, I think this kind of covers the basics, what I wanted to start with. I'm sure I'll have more to share when we start with the questions, but right now I think Ilya can offer more.
So what can I tell you as a war reporter here in Ukraine who's been in this war since the day one, as a civilian and also as a journalist, is that, we are in this security crisis, in this worst security crisis, I believe, since the worst days of the war in 2014 and 15. And right now, right here and now, in these days, we are reaching to a very interesting moment in the bad meaning of this world. When at first hand we have this escalation of this internal, domestic nervousness and panic, probably a sort of panic, a sort of, movement, best described by this withdrawal of diplomatic missions, partial withdrawal of this diplomatic missions of Canada, of the United States, of Great Britain, of other nations. And at the same time, we have a pretty impressive support and very timely support and very necessary support in terms of, providing us with extra, like, emergency style supply of weapons, and weapons that are super necessary right here and now for our specific situation here in Ukraine. Obviously, I'm talking about the British supply of anti-tank weapons, the huge supply, surprisingly huge supply, so huge that it was so politically sensitive that, politicians in Britain and here in Ukraine, even off the record, they were refusing to talk about this at all. They were saying that, it's so politically sensitive that we can't even tell you about any sorts of certainty in this regard, even the quantity of weapons or which kind of weapons are we getting. Like, we knew what kind of weapons we're going to get, but still there were so many weapons delivered here in Ukraine in the past days. And right now, in this moment, we have another third shipment of US military assistance, bringing us lots of javelins, even more javelin, anti-tank missiles, and also lots of anti-structure weapons, advanced weapons delivered here in Ukraine as the part of the additional military supply here in Ukraine. So, and obviously, let's not forget about the very generous and very brave decision by the Baltic countries, such as namely Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, to provide us with even more javelins, and also Stingers, the anti-aircraft man-portable systems, which were a sort of holy grail of Ukraine's defense community over these last days, because this is what exactly, as our defense community thinks, we need right here and now to repel the Russian invasion, or at least to increase our chances to withstand such an invasion, given the forces that we expect to meet here in Ukraine. So right now, I would say that what we have here is a very tense, very nervous moment that brings me to my memories of what I read about the First World War. You know, I'm a big fan of that period of story when, you know, lots of big powers were clashed in a very complicated juncture of interests, of conflicts, of mutual pretense. It ended up being something that resulted in a war, just because, you know, just one spark was enough to launch a world war. So this is what I'm afraid right here and now, even though I do not believe that the actual war, the big war, is likely against Ukraine. But, you know, what I'm afraid here and now, in this insane tension, diplomatic tension in political realm, and also in media space, what I'm afraid is this surprise stupidity, you know, surprise spark that gives birth to a big flame. So yeah, we are now in a pretty tense moment and pretty interesting moment from the historical point of view, and I do sincerely hope that it dies down gradually, probably within next months, but I do hope that it goes down. But right now, you know, the more time it takes, the less optimistic I grow, because of many things that we see on the ground. So yeah, this is a very tense moment for us all, and similarly to pretty much, I guess, any military and defense journalist in Ukraine, I'm getting lots of messages from my friends, my personal friends from my personal life, asking me just to be honest, if we are facing an invasion, do we have a big war on our heads right now? So up to this moment, I was pretty optimistic. I was super optimistic because, you know, because of things that Ola mentioned, because of all these reports that analyze the situation from the, you know, strictly military point of view, not from the point of evaluations or of sentiments or second guessing, trying to second guess Putin or the whole the Kremlin, but on the, you know, technical military point of view. Yes, do we so far see no tangible indications that could technically indicate the imminent invasion, you know, because, you know, the military, the art of war is not as simple as the civilization game. You can't simply put tanks to a territory and then move them in. You have to do a lot of stuff to prepare the invasion. And lest we forget about the fact that, you know, if Russians decide on invading and occupying Ukraine, this is going to be a World War II style operation. The scale of immense brutality, the scale that is pretty much unprecedented in this modern world. It could be competing probably with the Iraq war or even suppress it. So yes, this is a very tough moment, and, you know, we need discussion. We need to answer questions, because, you know, what I see from my friends that ask me, from what I see from lots of people in media space and social media, is that our worst enemy in this situation is uncertainty. Even to myself, I recently had a column for an Israeli newspaper in which I just came to the conclusion that the worst enemy in this twilight of war is the uncertainty. On the one hand, you understand, your voice of reason tells you that Russians are not really capable militarily, politically, economically, in many other regards. They're not capable of launching such an operation. And the price would be so ridiculously high that it just does not justify the goal, what they can get from such an operation. But on the other hand, you know, there's always room for hesitations. What if I'm wrong in this regard? What if my voice of reason betrays me and deceits me? So in this situation, I do believe that we need to discuss, we need to read more, to abstain from our emotions, abstain from our deliberations, speculations as well, because this is what I see in large amounts in Ukraine and also world media. So that's why probably we are here. We're trying to put emotions aside and things and look into things from a rational point of view. This is because, as I believe, this is the best way for us to stay strong and stay clever and stay cool in this situation. Put emotions aside and see into rational things. So if you have any questions, and I'm sure you do, we'll be happy to provide us with what we see here on the ground.
Thank you, Olyo and Ilya, for those very interesting and in some ways very concerning remarks. For the audience, we have about 35 minutes of time now for questions, so please do type your questions into the chat, and I will try to kind of combine them as themes and ask them of our two panelists. So I do encourage both Olya and Ilya to answer these as I ask them. So I guess the first one is kind of a two-part question about the preparedness of Ukrainians and the feelings of this soldiers at the front, and also about the territorial defense units and their preparation, about which we've been hearing quite a bit, and there's been quite a bit of reporting on both of those. So I will give, either Ilya or Olya, please comment on those two issues: territorial defense forces and the kind of mood or morale at the front in the east, please.
I think this is a question for me, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. It's a great question, and I love answering this because it's really complicated. First is the preparedness of armed forces and and other power agencies here in Ukraine. Of course, let's admit the truth. Let's face the truth that the armed forces of Ukraine, even though they have seen lots of changes, positive changes and positive shifts over these years, they are far from being perfect. Of course, it is still pretty much in many ways the same Soviet style military that we had before the war, but the edge behind this is that obviously it's very different in terms of morale, in terms of organization, in terms of this sustainability, and it's very different from what we had back in the day in 2014, when it was so disorganized, so headless, that it could not offer any resistance, any sorts of slightest resistance to the Russian invasion of Crimea, for instance. Or in many ways, it was so demoralized or so disorganized that it was very poorly effective in terms of sustaining to the militant forces in Donbass back in 2014 when the whole thing was being started. But right now, after 6 years, even though it's not perfect, but I believe this is the thing that I do believe in, is that right now the armed forces of Ukraine is stable enough and motivated enough to make the price of invasion way too costly and unacceptably costly for the Russian military. Of course, I'm not saying that the Ukrainian military, in all of its obsoleteness and all of its lack of modern equipment, like air force, air defense, it's definitely weaker than the Russian military. But the question is, and the task is to be strong enough to make the price for such invasion unacceptable. And yes, we do have this. And one of the main indications for me of that is that I get deployed to Donbass as frequently as I can and as much intensely as I can. And what I see over these years in Donbass is that these guys, I mean, the Ukrainian soldiers, they get deployed for 8 years, for almost 8 years, more than 7 years. They hold the line, which is 400 kilometers long, the front line, which reminds us a lot about, World War II static warfare. And they do the job day after day. Donbass war zone is the place where time stands still. It's the war that is super stable, super routine, it's super boring, it's super not active in terms of what they do. It lacks of clear action. And these guys, they do not have the clear vision of any victory in sight, of any success in sight, but they keep doing their job day after day, year after year. So as history shows, and we have lots of examples of that, is that the militaries that are not involved in active fulfillment of missions, they tend to get demoralized and decay with the time, in terms of morale and discipline and many other things. And this is exactly what we're not seeing in Donbass. So these guys, they keep doing their job no matter what. So I would not suggest underestimating the force that is capable of that is strong in its spirit to keep doing that after 8 years of never changing war. And besides, let's not forget about the fact that we have hundreds, if tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of combat hardened and super motivated combat veterans that left the military for civilian life for many reasons, because of bureaucracy, because of low wages, bad conditions of service, but still they are in civilian life, they're in the country, and they still know how to hold a rifle. And I absolutely sure, I give you 100% that if something comes, if the worst happens, they will be ready to get back in ranks, in fights. And let's not forget also about the volunteer movement, because as the year 14 showed, that the general population of Ukraine, it has a very huge tendency towards self-mobilization, self-organizing into volunteer movements that used to fight fiercely against foreign militants occupying the tiny patch of the land in the east. So what happens if the whole of the country would be in immediate threat of invasion and foreign occupation? I believe, the whole potential in the military and in the general population would be strong enough to be a very strong factor against the invasion. And Russians know it. Russians know it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have another question about more the domestic political situation. So is the current administration sufficiently focused on uniting the country to prepare for its defense? And is there a risk of distraction and unnecessary division in the pursuit of legal charges against former President Poroshenko at this time? So I will leave it to
I think I can take that one.
Yeah.
I'll keep up.
Yes. So about uniting the country, personally, I don't see any efforts in terms of communication or otherwise on the part of the current administration that would be aimed at what you just mentioned, which is uniting the country. Unfortunately, the communication efforts of the government and the presidential administration specifically have not been great in this situation. Last week, we were taken on a kind of emotional roller coaster when President Zelensky made his first address about the military buildup and the threat of the invasion. The first time he actually addressed the situation since it started, let's count, in November. And in this address it was a 7-minute video that he put out and addressed to all Ukrainians. The main message there was to stop all panic and to keep calm. Unfortunately, it's not only my opinion, but I also heard it from many people that the message, the address came across as really tone deaf. It was quite patronizing. It did not give any tangible reassurances about why we should be, keeping calm, and whether the government is doing something to address this threat. And it also ended on a kind of a lighthearted tone, saying, lighthearted note, saying that, I think the exact phrase that Zelensky used was, "You want to know what comes next? Well, I'm going to tell you what comes next. There's going to be Easter in 2 months, and then there's going to be summer, and then New Year, and we're going to have shashlik and celebrate." And it really came across as tone deaf, given the seriousness of the situation. And not only that, but next day after that, an interview by Zelensky comes out in, I think it was the Washington Post, where he takes a completely different tone and says that Russia, in fact, may occupy Kharkiv, which is Ukraine's second biggest city in the east. And every one of us here in Kyiv were like, wait, what? Like, how did we go from, keep calm, nothing's going to happen yesterday, to Russia is seizing Ukraine's second biggest city today? This was completely disorienting, and it was one of the examples of just how the government, unfortunately, is not communicating with the people of Ukraine very well about this situation. So I think that answers the first question. And also, I'd like to add that this week there was a poll where I think 56 or something like that % of Ukrainians said that they don't have confidence in that the president, Volodymyr Zelensky, can be an effective leader should there be an invasion. So, and I think that kind of reflects what happened, how they've been losing the communication front. So the second part of the question was, I think, about Petro Poroshenko, the case against Petro Poroshenko. I would again use this opportunity to refer you to our website, thekyivindependent.com, because about right now, or maybe within next 30 minutes, we will publish and explain a story about the case of Petro Poroshenko. I finished editing it right before I went on this call, so I don't know if it's up already or not. But I do recommend reading it if you want to know more about the persecution of the former president. I agree that, and again, this is I think the view of the majority of people, that the timing of this case, no matter whether it's a real investigation or it's a political persecution, the timing of the case is very unfortunate. And of course, Petro Poroshenko and his supporters are trying to emphasize it and say that this is not the right time to be going after each other, and that we should unite in the face of Russian threat. Yes, the timing is definitely not perfect. At the same time, this has been the investigation against Poroshenko and several, because he's been, there have been, I think, 8 cases opened against him, maybe more, I'm not sure. It has been mounting for quite a long period of time. So I personally don't think that was done on purpose, that this is happening at the same time, as we have this threat of the Russian invasion. It's more like, I don't think it's done on purpose. It's more like lack of strategic thinking on someone's part, and unfortunately, it does hurt the image of Ukraine, especially in the EU, and especially because the former president does have connections there, and he spent the past several weeks allegedly meeting with many people in the EU and trying to convince them that he was a victim of political persecution. At the same time, I don't think that this is I don't think that it's like we would have much more support without this case. I mean, it's not of critical weight for for the EU to decide whether to support Ukraine or not. I think they would have been doing pretty much the same whether was the case against Poroshenko happening right now or not. This is my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Ilya, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. I completely agree with what Oля has said. Political leadership of Ukraine in this time of the year is not, in my view, doing a good job in terms of communicating with the society, because the communication policy is very confusing, like Ola said. And besides, in terms of, for instance, things like they say that we are prepared for any case or any scenario that could end up as a reality. But for instance, if we mention civil defense here in Kyiv, last night, I guess that was last night, when Secretary of National Security and Defense Council Danilov said that we do have like a civil defense or a civil war alert system in Kyiv, for instance. But he failed to answer the direct question how it would work and what it is like at all. I'm telling you my personal story. I guess that was in late December when we were expecting the test of air raid systems here in Kyiv. The sirens, and we did expect this. I was expecting to record it for our readers, but guess what? It never happened, even though I saw the announcement on my entrance door in my house. It never happened just because they failed to decide on the test. So basically what we have here is civil defense system in this pretty tense situation not being tested, not being checked in this regard. So I don't think that we can give a great aid to the political, strictly civilian political leadership in this regard. But what gives me comfort and what gives me hope is the defense sector, the military and also defense ministry. Because first thing is that we right here and now, we have a very good leadership in these regards. Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov and also the top general, the top commander of the armed forces, Valery Zaluzhny, they have the good chemistry between them, and they're doing a good job in terms of doing the things that they have to do in this regard. The armed forces, they play cool, they are not making any stupid statements. They keep training, they insist of having the whole of the situation under control. They have regular statements explain the situation for civilians, but in this regard, political leadership is not doing a good job in this regard. So we have this confusion between the military being pretty good in this regard, and civilian political leadership, I mean the presidential administration, not doing a good job. So this is the situation right here and now for us.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is about sanctions. So the United States and the EU have said that they will implement very severe sanctions in response to increased Russian invasion. Can you comment on the view from Ukraine about whether it is more effective to use these sanctions as a threat to prevent a further invasion, or whether it's more effective to place these sanctions now and then remove them in the event that Russia withdraws and de-escalates? I don't know who wants to take that one first.
If I may to start. I guess that was in late December that we in Kyiv, we had a meeting with Vice President of the European Council, Josep Borrell, basically top diplomat of the EU. And we were discussing sanctions and all those things that they want to do to deter Russia. And obviously, the top diplomat of the EU was promising the most severe sanctions upon Russia, which is pretty much what the US promises. But we were asking the very specific questions because they were always very vague nebulous in terms of describing what kind of sanctions would Russia face. It's not exactly the case for the US, but very much the case from my point of view when it comes to the EU. So they are talking about very severe sanctions upon Russian economy, Russian political figures. But I asked them the very certain question: what kind of questions and upon whom these sanctions would be applied, or how strong would that sanctions would be? Because from my point of view, this nebulous formulations of these sanctions, these very nebulous threats upon Russia if it decides to go in, are just encouraging Russians into escalating the crisis, because they percept, from my point of view, they perceive this as being not resolved enough and not concrete enough in this regard. So it just emboldens them. So the answer was that under the traditions of diplomacy, when you basically show up all of your cards, you just leave yourself powerless. This is their perception. So you can't simply name names who would be targeted by sanctions if Russians go in. But like I said, sanctions, I'm trying to look at this from the realistic point of view. Obviously, we're not expecting, EU nations militaries or the US military to have boots on the ground and actually to fight and defend Ukraine. We have our own armed forces for that. But, my take on this is that, the US and also the EU are not demonstrating strong messages that are strong enough in terms of sanctions, because they need to be tougher and more concrete in this regard, more certain in this regard. So this is my take on the picture.
If I can just briefly add something.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Ilya that I think in general, the general feeling in Kyiv is disappointment when it comes to sanctions, and when it comes to the strengths of the position demonstrated by some of our Western partners. I think the disappointment was most strongly felt, of course, when there were reports last week that Europe is no longer considering shutting SWIFT for Russia in case of the invasion, because that would really upset the financial markets. Then there was a number of other statements, like one of Germany's top officials saying this week that severe economic sanctions against Russia would have detrimental effect on Germany's economy. And I think the general feeling in Kyiv is a very strong disappointment, and something that we hear also always often speak about these days is how the Kremlin seems to be getting concessions from the West without offering anything in return. This setting where Putin makes a move, and then the West says, okay, if you go any further, there are going to be sanctions. And then he does go some, further, and the West says, okay, no sanctions yet, but if you go further than that, then sanctions, and then no sanctions. So this is kind of like the feeling that we all have. I personally think unlike almost anyone on Twitter and Facebook these days, I don't think of myself as an expert in geopolitics, but I do think that that Western countries are getting themselves into a trap, and that their response to Putin should have been stronger, not just now, but years ago. And yes, that's what I have to add.
If I may, just one more word. For our Ukrainian ears, when they say that Russians are going to face the toughest sanctions, so our best question to that is that what kind of sanctions do they face in the worst case scenario? So are they going to force Putin into watching the Game of Thrones last season or what? But So they simply show themselves, at least in the media space, in the public space, they show themselves so reluctant and so eager to go as intact as possible in the situation of actual war and actual, losses. So this is not definitely sending a good signal to Ukraine, and it's not sending good signals to Russia as well, because they feel themselves to lose to act in these circumstances when they are not being led of very strict punishments.
If I can add something very, very briefly to that, a lot of people I know are now watching the latest premiere on Netflix, which is the movie called Munich: The Edge of War, and it's it hits very close to home. It's very painful because we all of my friends are watching it, and we all agree that we feel like Czechoslovakia in 1938, like we are being traded off to appease a dictator. So I'm sorry if it sounds too pessimistic.
The next question is a bit of a follow-up on that, actually, and that is, we hear kind of constantly from the certainly the Americans and as well the European Union about nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. This is a principle that keeps getting repeated over and over again, certainly rhetorically, if perhaps not practically. And so the question is, do you think that that is actually being reflected in these negotiations? And second, if you have any thoughts about what Ukraine and Ukraine's leadership can be doing in order to ensure from Ukraine's point of view that indeed nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine is something that our governments stick to. So I don't know who wants to take that first.
I can start briefly, and then Ilya can continue. In short, no, I don't think that all partners are sticking to this. I think the weight of words devaluated a lot, and while we hear the US and the EU saying that they are going to be, publicly promising that they're not going to be discussing Ukraine's future without Ukraine at the table, but then we hear this messages coming from them, like when last week President Biden scared everybody in Ukraine by saying that a minor incursion in Ukraine would not provoke probably a big response from the NATO countries, because they would be they would disagree on what kind of response is needed, and it sent a horrible signal to us on the ground, because it really felt like the president of the US was basically allowing Putin to invade Ukraine, but just a little bit. So when you hear things like that, I think it definitely signals that a lot is being decided about Ukraine without Ukraine, and our partners are just declaring that. But unfortunately, that doesn't feel like it's the case. Ilya, do you have anything to add?
There's a thing that I often think about is that, historically Putin and the Kremlin, the collective Kremlin, they tend to seek direct dialogue or talks, but not with Ukraine, who they disregard as not a subject in the world policy, not a standalone nation with its own positions and interests, not as the player on this map. But they always seek to be talking directly to the US, to NATO, to the EU, because in many ways they need this narrative of Vladimir Putin being a man equal to the United States president, decided on the fate of the world, as if it's back in the Cold War. So in many ways, maybe this is just my assumption, and I leave some room for discussion in this regard, is that they deliberately push us aside from this negotiations, and they're not allowing space for Ukraine to have its voice in this. So it's just like a tete-a-tete meetings between two great powers, two superpowers in the Russian TV narrative. But what we can do as Ukrainian, the political leadership of Ukraine can do is that not to agree on even the slightest concessions that the West might ask from us to make things simpler in this regard. Because this is another thing that I often think about, is that the Kremlin's strategy was always to be tempting the West into go in the easiest ways, like to hell with Ukraine, to hell with Georgia, to hell with chemical poisonings and assassinations that we are doing. I mean, the Kremlin. Just let's forget about all those things and let's continue business as usual. Just go the easiest way. We mentioned Czechoslovakia and the Munich Agreement before World War II. So this was the mistake that politicians of the past did 80 years ago, 85 years ago. They went the easiest way, which ended up being the fastest lane to hell. So I believe the same logic is applied here. So the best thing that we can do is not to show any signs of being weak or being agreeable above the necessary in this regard, and to stay strong and not to make a single step back in this regard. This is, I believe, from the realistic point of view, this is the best thing that we can do in this situation.
Okay, thank you. We have about a couple 5 minutes left here. So one of the questions I'd like to ask you both is, Ukraine has a lot of friends and supporters abroad in Canada, in the US, and European countries. What would you advise, and what is your view on what Canada's friends abroad, or Ukraine's friends abroad, should be doing to support Ukraine and the Ukrainian people now? What is it that you think we should be focusing on right now, immediately? So I will ask either of you to take that, please.
I can start it off. Well, I think in short, as I said in the beginning, we do feel the support of Ukraine's diaspora and other communities abroad. I think that while we appreciate the support, I think all the actions of groups like that abroad should be directed at the governments of their countries to make sure that they know that this is that there is a group of population that does not think that this is okay, that what they're doing in regards to Ukraine and to appeasement of Russia is fine. I think, since it is politicians who decide the things and they do care about things like their next re-election, I think just ringing the bell inside the country, making sure that the politicians know that at least a part of their potential voters do not support appeasement of Russia and to trading off Ukraine for whatever interests. I think that would could make a difference. Ilya?
Yeah, I most definitely agree with Ola, but I would also want to say that, what we expect from Canada as the probably most Ukrainian nation beyond, obviously Ukraine, is that to show more resolve in this pretty critical moment of world history in this century, just because, we in Ukraine, we definitely feel not super comfortable asking about, defense assistance, or weapons or something like that, or multi-million defense aid. But this is not what we're doing because we want to, because we are doing this because we have to. We're not asking for, foreign money or investment to build a theater in Kyiv. We are asking for money or an assistance just to survive as a nation, as a democracy, as an independent country. So this is what we have to do. And what I see based on the very recent events when it comes to Canada is that, Canada, from my perspective, should be feeling more free in terms of, showing resolve, and because its hands are not really that tight hard when it comes to, providing weapons to Ukraine, or even more training, or showing more resolve in this regard. So yeah, when it comes to, Ukrainians in Canada, I would say that, since, as Ola said, we have politicians to decide on these things, I think we would ask you guys to render more pressure and urge your politicians into showing more support in this regard, because, unfortunately, the nature of what we have here is so critical, so historical, that we need to be ready for tough decisions. And Canada has not exhausted its potential in what it can do. Obviously, it has more than 200 drilling structures providing military training for Ukraine, but more can be done. Definitely more can be done. And, Great Britain has demonstrated it, because, it has escalated drastically its support in Ukraine. When the first shipments of anti-tank missiles arrived in huge numbers. So I would suggest that you guys follow the lead of your British allies, and see that, being resolved, being on the right side of history is not something that is scary. That is not something that is too costly politically, economically, militarily in this regard. So I would invite you guys to be pressuring your government to send in more defense equipment to Ukraine, because every single bit, as I see here in Ukraine, every single bit of defense equipment matters, and it's valued, and it gets a lot of attention from here in Ukraine, because we are in this situation when every single bullet sent here in Ukraine in defense of ourselves matters. So, yeah.
Well, I think that is a very good place for us to end today's webinar. We are unfortunately out of time. I would just like to thank both of you and thank the Kyiv Independent for the work that you do. I would ask that everyone who's online, I know a lot of you are able to read Ukrainian and follow Ukrainian, but the Kyiv Independent is an excellent source in the English language. So for your non-Ukrainian speaking friends, I'm sure a lot of you are getting questions about Ukraine now and what's going on there. Please do send them to the Kyiv Independent, where they can understand a lot more about what's happening, and I think critically get the perspective of people in Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, about whom ultimately this is first and foremost about. This is their country. They are the ones under threat. We are supporting them, but this is not about Joe Biden, and it's not about Vladimir Putin. It is about the Ukrainian people and 40 million people who want to live in peace and in freedom. So please do spread the word amongst everyone, and the more we can do, I think the better this situation will turn out. So again, Oля, Ilya, thank you very much. We will be bothering you again to give us an update soon. And thank you to everyone who participated today, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Okay, дякую.
Героям слава. Thank you for doing this. Thank you.
Thanks.